So I'm Writing a Novel is the show where you join me, Oliver Brackenbury, on the journey of writing my next novel, from first ideas all the way to publication and promotion. In this one-man reality show, I'll share with you my ever-evolving thoughts and feelings on how I write, being a writer, and everything that entails at each stage of the process. I'll also interview special guests, and when people send them in, I'll answer listener questions. If you're the kind of person who likes to learn how things are made and get to know the people making them, then this is the show for you. I'd like to say a quick thank you to our Patreon supporters who make this show possible. Patrons receive several lovely perks, like access to bonus podcast recordings, such as the one I'm going to do all about how I recently sold a Sword and Sorcery short story. And if you're not a patron already, you can check out all the other perks and exclusive content over at patreon.com/soimwritinganovel. While writing my Sword and Sorcery novel, I have been thinking a lot about pastiche and homage, and just the whole idea of trying to write like someone, like them, versus writing as they did and all that kind of thing. And this got me thinking about author Scott Oden. Scott is a lovely fellow that, yes, I see around the Whetstone Tavern Discord. And his name invariably seems to come up every time online, there or elsewhere. I have seen discussions of who would write a really good Robert E. Howard pastiche. Who has written one, actually, pardon me, but there's been a lot of discussions about further ones due to recent developments in the wacky world of publishing. So yeah. Anyway, I invited Scott on the show primarily with that in mind, but also because he recently got a 2-book publishing deal I thought would be interesting to hear about. And we got into a whole bunch of other stuff that really showed off Scott's thoughtfulness, intelligence, experience, and just personal depth. I think he's a great guy, and I want to introduce him to you if you don't know him already. So, if you do, spend some time with him, why don't you? Come on. Gee Louise. Okay, Oliver, let's go to the interview with Scott Oden. And here we are with Scott. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Oliver.
I made a loud noise with my desk, but you know what? I'm going to leave that in there as punishment for myself, the audio equivalent of rubbing my nose in it. So, Scott, I screwed up. You don't have to. I hope you'll forgive the softball of this question, but I really want more people to know you, and as basic as it is, I think it's interesting to know how an author's writing journey began. Were you writing stories as soon as you could hold a crayon in your hand? Or was there like a big moment of epiphany later in life? Like what happened? Like roughly speaking, how did you wind up deciding like, yeah, I'm a writer. I'm going to write.
It was April of 1981. I actually know exactly when it was. I was 14 years old, and I had picked up a copy of Writer's Digest off the rack, and there was an article about people making money as a writer. And I'd tried writing my Imitation Conan stories up till that. And a little light bulb went off. And I'm like, I can make money as a writer? I wanted to be either a professional dungeon master or a wizard, because I was really deep in D&D when I was 14. And they said, hey, you can be a writer. I'm like, wait a minute. And that was when it started. I was 14 years old, wrote my first story in about a month and sent it off to Weird Tales.
That's awesome.
Got a rejection.
Well, I mean, that's how it goes, right? I do feel like anybody who gets their first story accepted, I mean, maybe they're blessed and every story afterwards is accepted and they ride up to the heavens, but I wonder if that's kind of like, that might throw you a little bit, give you weird expectations.
Well, see, that's the curse, is every novel I've ever written has been accepted. Every short story has been rejected. So.
Dear, that's very curious.
That is weird. I mean, yeah,
I'm sure you've thought long and hard about it. Do you have any? What do you think? What do you think's up with that?
I'm able to bullshit longer in long form. So, short stories are too concise. I like to pad out stuff. I like to describe things. I'm a child of Tolkien.
Who is kind of short by modern standards. I mean, I know, like, take a shot, somebody who likes SMS complains about phone book length fantasy novels, but still,
yeah.
It is funny how he's come around from being the example of, like, the big the smaller older phone book, I guess.
Yeah.
and no longer really at all.
Yeah, and I've tried to write. I want to write like a cozy fantasy story.
Yes, yes. Now, listeners won't know what that means necessarily, so let me just tee that up for you, if I may.
Sure.
Folks, if you remember my interview, if you listened to that one with Nat Webb about publishing a magazine, and this magazine was called Windgraph, which was all about cozy fantasy, which I think he described as something kind of like the quieter moments of The Hobbit, to bring it back to Tolkien. And you submitted a cozy story too, Nat, didn't you?
Well, actually, I guess I did. I wrote one. I actually posted it on the Whetstone Discord, and he was like, "No, just no."
Wasn't it kind of, my apologies, I didn't get a chance to read it yet, but wasn't it kind of actually cozy except for one key moment where a dog got killed and it was like...
He didn't get killed, he just
died, man.
He didn't get killed, he got shot with a crossbow.
And it
was a puppy. It wasn't a dog, it was a puppy. So. But, the descriptions weren't cozy. I'm in the middle of my dark fantasy epics. There was nothing cozy about it. So, but he's like, well, it's well written, but it's not cozy. I'm like, man, my mom would have been so proud.
Well, there's still time.
I don't know. I'll try it someday, but that's my goal, is to write a cozy short story.
So moving on from that moment of epiphany as a adolescent, right? It's no secret Men of Bronze was your breakthrough novel.
Yes.
Why do you think that was the book that got your career started? Because I was reading on your blog how you did take a crack at like a cyberpunk, book at one point. Yeah. There's some other stuff obviously as well. What do you think it was about Men of Bronze?
Probably because it was the first one I finished.
Oh, well, that would help. Yeah.
I don't know. I kept getting rejections from agents, and I tried agents first before going to publishers. Every agent was like, I can't sell this. I don't know how to sell this. Ancient Egypt doesn't sell, which, is BS. Ancient Egypt sells extremely well.
Yeah, that's a bit weird.
Yeah. Finally, somebody's like, oh, man, I'm an Egyptophile. I'll take it. And
that was at Medallion Press,
yes,
right?
Mm-hmm. They threw sacks of money at it. They threw somewhere short of $250,000 in marketing.
Wow.
And this was in 2005. They flew me to New York, wined and dined, the whole 9 yards. But they were such a new company, they couldn't get the book into bookstores.
Oh, no.
And, it had the cover of Publishers Weekly, but you couldn't go down to Barnes & Noble and buy a copy. So, it sold better than most first novels, but it didn't sell well enough to get noticed, though it got noticed by an editor at Thomas Dunn Books, whose wife was born 20 minutes away from where I live.
Huh.
So he kept track of all of local writers. If somebody popped up on the radar, he'd go and talk to them. So he came to one of my book signings locally, and we chatted and hit it off, and when I got ready to move to fantasy, I dropped him a line, and he's like, yeah, I'll buy 4 of your books. Had no idea what I was going to write. So he bought 4 books untitled and said, hey, why don't you try something like, what if Robert E. Howard had written about assassins in the Middle Ages? I'm like, okay, let's go with that.
Sounds good, yeah.
What the hell? And that was The Lion of Cairo.
Right.
But yeah, that was my first interaction with an actual New York editor. He's an interesting fellow. He's still my editor to this day. So,
where did Memnon fit? Because that was between those two books.
Memnon
right?
was a standalone biographical novel, kind of in the same style as the Harold Lamb biographical nonfiction, except it was fiction. It was actually spawned by a line, like a half a paragraph, in Harold Lamb's Alexander of Macedon. And the paragraph, it was about Alexander the Great finding a bracelet in his concubine's possession that was engraved on the inside that said, for the love of Memnon of Rhodes. And that was where the novel came from.
Oh, very cool.
It turns out Memnon was the only person he was hesitant to face in battle because he had lived with them. He had lived in Macedonia when Alexander was a boy. He knew all of their secrets. He knew all of how they fought, and he was hesitant to fight him on an open battlefield. Luckily, the Persians, being Persians, didn't trust him enough to lead an army, so they put satraps in charge, and they messed it up. And by the time he actually did take command, you couldn't stop Alexander. He was on a roll. But there's maybe 12 mentions of him, of Memnon, in ancient sources, and that's all I had to go on.
Well, lots of room to create your own thing then. So
yeah, but I had to create my own thing that looked like it belonged. The best analogy I come up with is art restoration.
I like that.
You have a painting, you know bits and pieces of the painting, you know the style of the painting. So you have to fill in all the missing details and make it look like it belongs.
I really like that. And it makes me think of something I was reading on your blog earlier while preparing for this, about how you said when you were younger and you were kind of coming into Men of Bronze and then on after that you had felt that world building was a weak point for you. So, hey, let's do historical because the world's already built. And then you discovered the hard way.
Wow.
That's not how that goes.
Man, the naivete of youth.
How bad was the learning curve with that?
It wasn't as bad as it could have been. Luckily, I had some decent books from the library. I had access to, it was an older version, but it was a Cambridge Ancient History. And if you know anything about those, you know they're like 24 volumes. So I was able to get the best research I could find at the time. And let me tell you, from a little small town in North Alabama, that's saying something. Because I now have more ancient history books than my library has. So it got me started, and this was pre-internet, so I couldn't just go Google it. But just getting the interlibrary loan to send different books on ancient Egypt. And I discovered that though I could not make a world, I could put together puzzle pieces of a world that exists and describe it in such a way that it seems real. You know, ancient historical novels are nothing but fantasy that went to college. That's it. Nothing in them is historically accurate. People will go on and on. They will start fights over historical accuracy. Nothing is historically accurate. We don't know how they lived. We know bits and pieces. We know some of the high points. I always use if you've ever read Stephen Pressfield's Gates of Fire, it's an extremely good book on Thermopylae. Novel. Probably 99% of it he made up. The Spartan training program, we don't know what the Spartan training program was. We know its name. We have some indication it was tough. He took his Marine Corps background and turned it into a Spartan training program.
Yeah, I was waiting for that.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
To me, he pioneered something called cross-pollinating research. If you don't know enough about a horse culture, you find another horse culture and steal from them.
I think that's honestly a very sane and sober appraisal of historical adventure.
Yeah.
Because it's just so weird to me when people get super hung up on the details and being quote unquote accurate and how they attempt to prove whether they are or aren't.
Yeah.
As if the thing's meant to be a textbook.
Yeah.
As if that's the purpose and not telling like a great story. You know, it's very strange, but I guess you get people literally watching like The Queen right now and being like, "Hey, hang on, this seems a little sensationalized." It's like, yeah, what do you think?
Well, see, and that's part of the problem is they'll watch media and think that it's real. They'll watch Rome and think that's actually what happened. I've gotten into a lot of arguments online with people who would watch, well, to use a kind of timely reference, most of the movies with ancient Egyptians don't actually feature Egyptian actors. They feature white dudes. So you'll have one group of people who believe that ancient Egyptians were white because they saw Gerard Butler in an Egyptian movie. Then you'll have, in the opposite category, you'll have people that think Cleopatra was black because she's African. And it's no, she was a Macedonian Greek who lived in Africa. There is a complete difference. Yes, she was the only one that could speak the language of her family line, but she's described in several Roman texts. She was pale-skinned.
Yeah, it's weird how that goes, I guess. I mean, what can I say? It's nothing new. People take their prejudices and their notions and apply them on the past all the time. But when it's filtered through a fantasy novel and people try to hold it up as text, wow, anyway. I feel like we could chew that on that for a while, but it does bring me to your website, which I noticed actually since I last looked at it has been jazzed up quite a bit.
Yeah, I went to town on it because I was procrastinating. I have a book to write, so let me fix my website.
Hey, why not, right? Fix the website, clean the kitchen. It's always a good thing to do when you got a book to write. I like the tagline that you put underneath your name right up in the header, which reads, "Where history meets fantasy," which certainly, evokes sword and sorcery for me, a guy who's very deep into it right now. I myself know you entirely from the sword and sorcery scene, but I'm curious, like, would you consider yourself, an author of sword and sorcery? Like, how do you feel about the term? What's your relationship to it?
I love the term. I am also an author of sword and sorcery. My primary tag is historical fantasy. That's what I call myself. With the exception of the Conan pastiche I've written, I've never written a traditional sword and sorcery story. I don't know why. Probably because I suck at short stories, but,
So actually, do you mind elaborating on that a little bit? What was that Conan pastiche? I've probably heard the story on the server, but we can't assume everybody listening knows.
Well, in a couple of years ago, about 2019, Frederick Malmberg, who owned, at the time, Cabinet Entertainment, had relicensed the Conan comics to Marvel. And they were going to do a Conan the Barbarian and a Savage Sword of Conan. So he wanted fiction in the back of each one. And so I had gotten wind of this and shamelessly worked any connection I had between myself and Frederick Malmberg to convince them to, beg that I get to do one of them. It doesn't matter which one. Let me do one of them. And he heard it. The way I hear it, it was Rusty Burke that tipped it in my favor. Because, they've worked together for years on different projects. Rusty was a big fan of Men of Bronze. And if you read Men of Bronze, you can see that it has Conan's DNA all over it. So they gave me a shot at writing a 12-part novella that would be serialized in the back of Savage Sword of Conan. And they gave me a couple of weeks to write it, and I went into my writing shack. This is my writing shack. And I hammered out 12 1,500-word segments. And I had Howard Andrew Jones read over it, and he helped, smooth the transitions into it. And I tried my best to channel my inner Robert E. Howard. Most pastiche is not true pastiche. It's actually homage, because they don't write in the style of the person they're writing about, or the character. So for it to be true pastiche, and I'm pedantic about this, it has to be written in the same style as the original. And to my knowledge, I'm the only person that ever tried that and pulled it off, from what I've been told.
Well, actually, that brings me to what was going to be my next question, because I have seen your name come up more than once in discussions of what currently working authors should be called upon to write new Conan novels. No shade on Sterling there with the new Conan coming out soon. But and the reason for that is, it's been said you do a bang-up job of writing an approximation of Robert E. Howard's voice. Now, I have not had the good fortune to read the pastiche you were just describing, but I'd like to know more. Like, how have you approached writing that voice in the past, and how would you, whether it was your first crack at what became Men in Bronze or the pastiche more recently, and how would you define Robert E. Howard's voice? Like, what makes it?
Okay. We're going to pause.
I know, that was a lot.
Well, no, because this has several parts.
All right.
I define Robert E. Howard's voice as a very active, vibrant style. On the surface, it can look purple, but he actually makes a lot of his words do double duty. He never, as far as I could tell, just put a word in there simply to use it. Almost every word of description he uses either adds to the emotion, the setting, or the color. There's not a great deal of character development through his stories. Conan is the same in The Hour of the Dragon as he is in Tower of the Elephant. He's the same fighter. He has the same temper, he has the same temperament. Now, he ages and he starts having, he's not quite as quick to anger, I'll say that, in Hour of the Dragon as he is in Tower of the Elephant. But then there are points where he is. It's really strange. He doesn't change. But that's part of the beauty of Conan. He does not change. You know what you're going to get when you read a Conan story. And from the minute we pick up a pen, we're told that every story has to have an arc of some kind. The character needs to change from beginning to end. There has to be something that changes. Howard proved us wrong. Conan never changes. He will either succeed in what he's doing or he'll fail and still get by on the skin of his teeth. He himself never changes. So that almost timeless mythic quality of a character, that to me is just the cornerstone of Howard. All of his characters are like that. They're all almost mythic archetypes of the type of character that they're playing. That's why it's so easy sometimes to slip, say like one of the Crusader stories. It's very easy to turn it into a Conan story because it's the same archetype. You know, he's presenting the same type of character, but in a different setting. So that's my answer for the first part. And I forgot the second part of the question.
No worries. I was just asking, how have you approached writing that voice in the past, whether it was the run-up to Men of Bronze or the pastiche more recently? And then the other was, how would you define Howard's voice, which I believe you just did quite well.
Okay, so how I approach it, I try to get a hold of the same source material that Howard would have had. So luckily, there's a website that lists the books that he had in his possession when he passed away, and every book that he'd mentioned in his letters. So I've actually been able to find a few of those. Most helpful have been Harold Lamb. Harold Lamb's The Crusades is pretty much a textbook for how the Hyborian Age works. You know, Howard's fantasy, he wrote thinly veiled historical fiction. And people will debunk this theory, but this is my theory. He got rejected by adventure so many times with historical fiction that he decided he's going to write historical fiction for his best-selling market, which is Weird Tales. So he had to divorce himself from being anything like historically accurate and throw magic into it. And that's because he's writing these at the same time. He's writing his Crusader stories, which are some of his best stories, at the same time that he's creating Conan. The Crusader stories keep getting rejected. You know, he can sell them to Oriental Stories, which is Weird Tales' sister magazine, but he can't sell them to Adventure, which was what he was trying to do. So he takes everything he knows and puts it into a blender, hits start, and the Hyborian Age comes pouring out of it. So all of his work that he's done to read about the Celts, the Irish, the Gaels, the Norse, all of that goes into the Hyborian Age. And he does not change a lot of the texture of this. Conan, even though he is a Cimmerian barbarian, is very much a Celt. It's in his DNA. And when he wrote the Hyborian Age essay, he made sure to link the two. The Cimmerians are the forebears of the Celts.
Although coming back to that blender you mentioned,
Yeah.
right? If I remember correctly, the Cimmerians is a name from actual history, but it's not from anywhere near the Celts.
No,
It's
from the Black Sea.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he just liked the name.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
Because he had some access. He didn't have access to primary source material, but he had access to really decent translations like Stanley Lane Poole. Lane Poole was a historian who he wrote very purple histories. He wrote a history of Saladin that I know Howard had. And Rusty Burt, when I was writing The Lion of Cairo, sent me pages that he had photocopied from his copy of that. Because I had this theory that there are sections of the story Gates of Empire that actually appear almost verbatim in the historical record of William of Tyre. And I could not figure out how, because I know William of Tyre was not translated into English until the 1940s. So he couldn't have gotten a hold of that because he didn't speak or read a foreign language that I know of. I was able to find it in Harold Lamb and in Stanley Lane Poole. And it reads just almost exactly verbatim to what they had put in their translations. Because Harold Lamb read French. Yeah. And as far as I know, Lane Poole did also.
Right, and I mean it's been said in many places before here. Robert E. Howard loved Howard Lamb, and studied the hell out of his work. Which, reading the Cleat the Cossack stories earlier this year, I could definitely see. Those photocopied pages, did they have Robert E. Howard's annotations? Were they in the corners? Was that? How handy were those? I mean, that sounds very interesting to read.
Well, the one I had didn't have any annotations. This was just Rusty's copy of the same book.
Oh,
I don't know where the book got to after he passed away. I think Dr. Howard sent a lot of stuff off to some of his friends, but somewhere out there is a copy of The Crusades by Harold Lamb that probably has annotations from, and I went and got the exact same copy that he would have. I actually found it's a 2-volume set, and I needed the second volume, so I was able to really get it for a decent price.
Well, that's interesting. So same primary sources.
Same primary sources. Approach it not as fantasy. I don't think Howard approached his stuff as fantasy. He approached it as historical fiction with a twist of the weird. So I do the same thing. And I think that's where a lot of other Conan authors had gone sort of sideways, is they approached it as fantasy and would throw in fantasy tropes. A lot of fantasy tropes have no place in Sword and Sorcery. Like a discussion I saw online about Dark Lords. There are no Dark Lords in Sword and Sorcery. There are no Sauron figures.
Not even good old Thothamon there?
No. When we meet Thothamon, he is a slave. He has made a mistake and got screwed over and is now enslaved to a arrogant Aquilonian. And apparently he can't work his magic without his ring.
Yes, and you know what? You do a good job reminding me that this is important to look at Howard's stories.
Yes.
Not say... I think Carter and DeCamp were probably the first people to try and turn Thothamon into more of a Saturday morning cartoon villain.
Yeah.
Dark Lord, I guess, kind of thing. So,
and they really went with it in the comic books. Now, I've never actually read anything but Savage Sword. I never read the old Conan the Barbarian comic.
Yeah, the Marvel regular line.
Yeah, I never read those.
Savage Sword is where I started.
Yeah, a lot of people start with those. I was, I guess, too old at the time. I started reading the Ace editions when I was about 11 years old. So I had this freakishly good reading ability, but it was offset by the fact that I can't see numbers, so I can't do math.
Oh, you win some, you lose some, I guess.
Crom giveth, Crom taketh away.
Oh, dear. But yeah. Well, I mean, the fantasy trope of the Dark Lord for sure. Is there anything else that comes to mind? I feel like the Chosen One is definitely not something.
He didn't do Chosen Ones, and he didn't.
Howard.
Yeah, he didn't really do anything about saving the world. Even in Hour of the Dragon, he wasn't so much saving the world as he was getting back what he had rightfully stolen.
Yeah, it still felt personal.
Yeah.
Even if the greater setting of the whole story was much bigger than normal.
Yeah, it was. You stole something from me that I stole fair and square, so I'm going to get it back. I think it helped a lot to be a historical fiction author previously. Instead of making stuff up, it's the same thing applies, like we were talking about before. Instead of art restoration, it's art forgery.
I like it.
And so you steal bits and pieces from the same places and you create a fake Howard. And hopefully, if you do it right, you can't see the seams. The other thing is word choice. Howard was very particular with word choice. So I got a hold of some really old thesauruses. Just to make sure that I always have a source of some of the same words that were common when he was writing. Now, he had, a freakishly large vocabulary himself, and so I made sure to surround myself with some of the same authors, some of the same technical bits, even down to the same words. And the rest of it is, I think, and it always sounds arrogant when I say it, but he grew up in a small southern town. I grew up in a small southern town. Actually, Cross Plains is bigger than the town I grew up in. I had brothers and sisters, but I'm the youngest of 5, and they were all, for the most part, out of the house. My oldest brother is coming up on 70. So, I was left alone. I was sickly as a child. I had asthma. Couldn't get out and run around, so I had to read. And that, to me, it's a shared background. You can fake the words and you can fake the research, but it's really hard to fake the sense of impending doom, the sense of, it sounds weird. Okay, this is going to be a long one. Howard killed himself when his mother entered her final stage. Everybody, thanks to DeCamp, thinks that this was some kind of weird Oedipal thing.
Yeah, just to hang on for a second.
Sure.
For listeners who aren't sure what
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
referring to, Alfred de Camp was one of the guys who did those Ace Conan novels I've referenced on the podcast before, which are highly contentious for a bunch of reasons that they mess around with the stories and put them in order, blah, blah, but they're also why a lot of people know about Conan in the first place. So you win some, you lose some. And Alfred de Camp, I want to say it was around 1980-ish, around that period, he wrote a biography of Howard.
I think it was actually a little earlier than that. I think it was in the 70s. And
okay, maybe the late 70s. Anyway, I'm being pedantic. Pardon me. The point is that he wrote a biography around then.
Yeah.
That was maybe a bit of a hack job. He definitely came at it with an agenda and sought people who could reinforce that agenda and only took from them what worked for him. And it was to basically, paint Howard as kind of like his words were kind of a crazy loner or whatever,
I forget his actual word. It was some weird phrase that he used to describe him. Something about psychosis.
Yeah, like he was engaged in art forgery of the kind, but with a man's life.
And some of his original stories for the Conan stuff, I think it was actually more Lynn Carter than him. Some of them weren't bad. I enjoyed them when I was a kid. I enjoy him now if I read them again, but I would much rather have pure Howard. But when he wrote this biography, he had already made up his mind that Howard had some kind of Oedipal complex, where his mother was concerned. Even though Novell and Price, who knew him, was like, no, it wasn't Oedipal. He was taking care of his mother. Even though Dad was a doctor, Dad was always gone, taking care of all of his patients, because this was back when the doctor visited you. So he would be gone for a week or two at a time. So it was Howard's job to take care of his mother. And in today's psychology, I actually think he had something called caregiver syndrome. When you're taking care of someone, you get so wrapped up in the idea of taking care of them that when they start to pass away, you can't understand what they're going to do without you. And it used to be a lot larger occurrence of suicide amongst caregivers outside of a hospital situation. Luckily, they've identified this as a problem. And the only reason I bring it up is I did the same thing. I took care of my parents. So this was before I had the chance to write the stories. I took care of both of my parents. They both died in my arms within 6 months of each other. So I understand the darkness. I was able to avoid his outcome, though I still do not remember anything from 2011 till 2014. I have, thank God for Facebook memories, because apparently I was a wordy motherfucker back then. Sorry.
Oh, don't worry about it.
But I was ranting and railing against God. I don't remember writing this stuff, but it was really good stuff. So I didn't actually come back to myself until 2014, and I'd gotten a note that my sister was dying. And that was what brought me back. So it's hard to write Howard if you've had a peaceful life, because you don't quite understand what drives his characters. And it's the same thing that drove him. And it's none of us will get out of here alive. Let me make the largest mark I can while I can. And for him, it was writing. For his characters, it's, railing against whatever the coming doom might be, depending on the character.
Making the most of it. You're making me think of Conan's speech in the Queen of the Black Coast there. Or basically, I haven't read it in a while, but a character within it is basically like, what if it's all simulation? What if it's all illusion? And he's like, what if?
I'm part of the illusion.
I'm going to live as hard as I can.
I live, I love, I slay, and I am content. Yeah.
Exactly. I'll leave the biggest marks.
And that's, characters like Bran McMorn have more of a purpose to their life than maybe Conan had. Bran McMorn is trying to save his people. Howard was trying to save his people. You can see the little parallels in all of his characters. He is, to me, he is every one of his characters.
Do you feel that you are your character?
Sometimes I'm like, God, I hope not. But yeah, there is a part of me in all of my characters. So
I think that's unavoidable. I don't think you can write something without finding a bit of yourself coming.
You have to put something of you. So you understand them. There has to be something of yourself in them. I notice as I get older, all my characters get older.
Yeah, I wrote, not to talk about me, but relevant to off of what you're saying. My second novel was a coming of age story about a teenager, and I wrote that in my early 30s, in part because I was like, I'm gonna start forgetting what the hell this was
Yeah.
even like. If I want to write the story, I got to do it now. There was a feeling of get on with it, man. Before you're 50, and you're trying to remember what it was like to be 17, and
See,
just,
no, I've never been able to write anything like that. Everything I've ever written is some kind of escapist adventure. I can't. Well, I've never tried writing anything close to real life.
I mean, we're all drawn to what we want to write, and I mean, you write what you want to write, and I mean, it's got you've sold every book you've tried to pitch, right? Which is more
Yeah,
than I can say. With all of my genre hopping.
If there's a book of mine that hadn't appeared, it's because I pulled it before I ever finished it, which was stupid sometimes, but you go with your gut.
Learning as you go along.
Oh man,
I do have a graceful Yeah, I don't have a graceful transition with this. My apologies. This question went a lot deeper. I was quite interested in everything you had to say, but now I'm left just having to go rinse the wheel, because what I was going to do was. And thank you for all of that. I really appreciate it. All your insight on REH and all that stuff. I wanted to follow that up by asking you, about something more contemporary. Back in the spring, you were a very enthusiastic, a very early booster. First got a post about it online, actually, of the idea of the sort of recent resurgence of Howard Andrew Johnson's term there, New Age, sword and sorcery. Like at least 6 weeks, I think, if not more, before somebody said to hey Oliver, do an anthology, and I was like, screw you, I'll do a magazine. And
well, see, at the time you were actually trying to compile a document.
Yes, it began as an ill-advised manifesto, which is a dangerous word, but I just was like, I got to put all this together in something, and then eventually it morphed.
I will reveal a little secret to you.
Go for it.
One of the reasons I posted is you were entering the shit or get off the pot territory.
Yeah.
So you were dragging out the wanting to define. And I remember telling myself, I'm just sitting there, I'm like, I can see this. I've seen this before in my life. I can see it. Let me give you a nudge. And so I figure I have a blog, you have a post. So
well, it worked, yeah, because you wrote your post, and then I was like, oh Jesus, shit! Now it's out there. I gotta do something. And so my first Scrabble was that blog post that you so kindly let me put up on your site. And that was a good reference point for quite a while before I got to the point of the magazine and the website for that and everything. And now it's a bit more, defined as I. But
you kind of moved forward. I saw you dithering a lot. So.
Well, I was reluctant to take ownership because, it's Howard's term. I also wanted everybody to get in on it, but I guess somebody's got to put a foot forward first, and you saw that and gave me the
and Howard was, Howard, I don't think Howard minded one bit that you took.
Well, I talked about it with him. I got his blessing for the magazine, as you can imagine. It's partly why he is in it. I wanted people to see him in it and have him tell you, its origin. That was very important to me.
Howard's a good dude. He's probably one of the most genial people I've ever met.
Yeah, no, I was very lucky. Actually, he was in Toronto just a few weeks ago, and we managed to connect for coffee and just hanging out for a bit in the afternoon. And it was confirmed everything I suspected from talking to him on the phone once or twice and online interaction.
I met him in person once at a Ren fair.
Oh, okay.
Now, what's funny, we used to joke about this. Okay, we have the same editor. We did when he was still at St. Martin's. We have the same agent. His wife's name is Shannon. My wife's name is Shannon. And we've never been seen in the same spot.
Until the Ren fair.
Yep, until the
release staged.
And I think there's only one photo of us. So we used to have some fun with that about nobody's ever seen us in the same building.
Was it the Howard connection that made it appeal to you? That want to get in there and boost it early, or what was it about the whole New Age sword and sorcery idea that not that we have to dwell on it? And I don't want to talk about my magazine. I want to talk about the idea as it was earlier, and that made you.
I thought the idea had a lot more merit than some of the stuff I've seen out there. We're in a pretty much a shitty time period, and there's a lot of negativity, and taking something that so many people love. And that so many people could love if they can get past the bugbears of the last century. Mm-hmm. That appeals to me to no end. And getting more people reading it, writing it, just talking about it, because it's one of those genres that it is universal. It's so versatile. There's hardly anything outside of a few hardcore epic fantasy tropes that you can't do with sword and sorcery. It works well when a historical. It works well in a secondary world. Works well male, female, every shade of gender in between. It works well with everything, so long as the writer both remembers the roots and has maybe a different place to go.
Yeah.
We don't want to rehash a lot of Howard was the same age as my parents.
Yeah.
My parents were some of the least racist people I knew, but they still had their racism. I never saw a person of color in my house, but I have stories of my dad going toe-to-toe with the local Klan.
Oh, wow.
And shaming them into going and cleaning up a site where they had burned a cross. And basically telling them if they didn't, I'm going to go tell your grandfather and he's going to beat the crap out of you. Because he was with the grandfather in World War II.
Oh, okay.
And sure enough, they went and did it. But I never saw a person of color in my house when I was growing up. There was none in our neighborhood. My parents weren't casually racist. They were just systemically racist.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction. I mean, we don't. I don't think we need to go too deep on this. As you said, it's a very well trod territory. And at the end of the day, I feel like I think people who are not white fellas like us, it's not a bad idea to give them a heads up before they read certain classic tales. I mean, obviously, Shadows of Zambula, because it affects people differently depending on where they're standing. At the intersection of identity when they read things. I don't think that's weenie to do. It's considerate, but at the same time, I also don't think there's a lot to be learned by hyper-examining the, as you say, sort of period racism essentially of Robert E. Howard. Especially when standing right beside him is someone who was exceptional for his period.
Oh, yes.
So there's an easy contrast there between the someone who was of their age and someone who was exceptional. And at the end of the day, I really like what you said about a minute ago about say New Edge and the idea of knowing the classics but having something new to take a new direction to take them. And that's kind of a big part of why we made the logo for the magazine that sort of Janus-faced battle axe, because I was like, I think you need to be looking both ways.
Yeah.
In a funny kind of fashion. You don't need to be change to the old tales, but know what you're building on if you want to be part in a tradition. And
now, see, when I was coming up as a writer, we didn't have the internet, didn't have newsletters, didn't have blogs, nothing like that. So there were a few articles in some of the trade magazines, like Writer's Digest, things like that. And that is some of the advice that they always gave, especially for genre. You need to read the genre you plan on writing in and know what's been done. There was a time when you could read everything that came out in a month. And a lot of people did, and they wrote reviews of it. So it was easy to find what's selling now, what people have done, the notable works of whatever subgenre you identify with. And it's the same thing now. Yes, the genre, all shades of fantasy have gotten monolithic. There's no way to read everything that comes out anymore. But you can still know the basics of what people are doing, what they've done, and where the room to grow might be. Where other stories can fit in. Well,
and I think that's one of the joys and one of the there are a lot of feelings I had when I was like, okay, I'm going to do this magazine, where I felt like or even before when I committed to writing my novel, where I just felt like there's a lot of opportunity to be had with sword and sorcery still. And one of those reasons coming off of what you're saying is that, it took some effort. And certainly I was very fortunate that I lived near a speculative fiction archive where they have basically one of everything. But, I read quite rigorously over the last few years. And at this point, of course, there's still, you could list for probably a half hour how many, one by one sword and sorcery books I have not read. And yet I feel like I've read enough. I actually kept a tally. I've read about 100. I know well enough. I'm not going to write a book about it, but I know well enough, Conan, Elric, Fafnir the Grey Mouse, or Jirel, so on and so forth, Imaro. I just, all kinds of names and adjacent names, Andre Norton's sort of Sword and Planet-y stuff. Yeah, I feel like if I can't write a sword and sorcery novel at this point, the problem isn't that I didn't study.
True.
There might be other problems, but I feel like I did the study. And I think that's kind of cool that I was able to, again, I had a big advantage in my neighborhood, but nonetheless, you can pick up a lot of stuff online and through secondhand bookstores and so on. I think it's still very attainable for someone to achieve a pretty solid understanding of the genre's history and feel well versed in it without having to spend their entire life reading it. Howard Andrew Jones himself has said, especially if you want to stick to like the really good stuff, you can read that, in a reasonable period. And then build on it and take it off to the stars. Whereas to try to do that with fantasy more broadly, good luck.
This is one of the things I like about Howard Andrew Jones. He's read everything, I guess, conceivable that interests him in sword and sorcery. So he started branching out into the things that inspired sword and sorcery writers.
Yes.
And so that takes his stuff to an entirely different level of what someone who may not follow Westerns. Sword and sorcery is a Western with a sword.
It often is. Or hard-boiled detective stories as well come to mind. If only for the amount of times that Conan's gotten clocked on the back of the head as a scene transition, but other more subtle things as well.
I even had to do that in my pastiche. I had to make sure you get clocked on the head. It's a tradition.
Perfect. Exactly. I am loving this, but I want to make sure we have time for some of the other questions I wanted to get into with you because, for example, one thing is you've recently tried self-publishing for the very first time with these, short novellas that you've put out, including a new Grimnir tale. How are you finding it so far? This is very new. This is like, what, 6 weeks?
Less than that. It's like 3 weeks, maybe? The best analogy I can come up with, it's like you're selling newspapers and you've got your stack of newspapers and you're barking, but there's nobody in Grand Central Station. You're just there yelling in the void. I don't know how a lot of these people... Well, actually, I do know how they do it. In order to make money self-publishing, you have to have money to spend on self-publishing. I get it. I understand that's how these people do it. But when you don't have... When your budget is belly button lint and, a handshake, there's no way to do it.
Yeah.
There is no avenue anymore that's not monetized to get the word out to people. I had great responses on like Twitter and Facebook. Then the algorithm choked them off. And if you don't pay the algorithm won't let people see it. I had some pretty decent interaction on Reddit, but I guess they've figured there's a whiff of self-promotion, so they pulled the post.
Oh, this is on r/fantasy, I assume.
I mean, there's like 1 million something people there, so that's a prime location to get the word out. But if there's even just a hint of self-promotion, the moderators will toss it in the bin. And I don't know, certain people can do it, and I guess I don't know how they do it, but their posts get through. But unless you spend a whole lot of time hanging out at Our Fantasy, they won't let it go through.
Yeah, and that's the part I find very tricky. I've really enjoyed becoming active on Whetstone, and as I've said before on this very show, the magazine wouldn't have happened without it. And outside of the magazine, I built relationships that I think will be beneficial to me when my novel's ready to go. Like, I definitely feel like, this is benefiting me. This is great. Plus, just lovely friendships have come out of it. But then I looked at Our Fantasy and I was like, okay, I should be promoting on there. And then it's like, I don't have time to be active. This is the generic advice you see a lot, right? Which is like, oh, try and be active on the place before you post there. r/fantasy has it codified in their moderation rules or whatever. But even so, beyond that, just everywhere. You're supposed to be active everywhere. And it's like, there's not enough hours in the day. It's foolishness. So I try not to throw up my hands and just get exasperated because I feel like, well, okay, let's just keep experimenting and find something.
Yeah. Once the algorithms throttled that, I went from, 10 or 15 sales a day to nothing.
Well, I'm guessing part of that must have been Facebook too, right? Because Facebook it went from being a decent place to promote to, I do it. I promote this very show on there, but I don't expect miracles because of how it works, especially coming off of your own page, right? Going around the houses of the various Facebook groups and sharing there is fine, but then none of those Facebook groups have anything even approaching. I don't know what happened with the r/fantasy becoming the place. I'm not aware of any other community that has even a 5-digit following. There's one or two that have 4-digit followings. Most of them
our books.
No, it's not one or two. They're
our books has 20 million.
Well, books at large, holy cow, But for fantasy and its subgenres, it seems to be 98% r/fantasy and a scattering of little groups.
And it seems also, I know a lot of these self-published authors. I know there are private Facebook groups where they get together and plan their campaigns. I used to belong to one. Then they realized I'm not self-published at the time, and I think I got kicked out. It's like, dude, I'm getting all this good information. But so it's the internet is just cliquish. It's the high school lunchroom, and if you don't belong to the right clique, it's really hard to get any traction. I wouldn't want to self-publish an entire book now, after seeing this. Yeah. Pretty much I have enough. I have probably 40 to 50 hardcore fans on Facebook that will buy something if I put it for sale. And after that 40 or 50 that see my posts, nobody sees them. Thank God for that 40 or 50, because that's pretty much what happened with this. Is basically the same people that I see liking my posts bought the stuff, the stories. And they bought, various one of them. They might buy one, they might buy all three, they might just buy this one. That's fine. You don't have to buy all three. That's why I broke them up like that. But it's the same people that I've seen every single time. If I post something, the same likes are the same people that buy it. So I know you're only going to a certain amount of people.
And you're grateful for the followers you have, but of course you want more. And then you get all this advice that also kind of feels almost designed to annoy the followers you have, which is bug them to, like and subscribe, bug them
join
to tell
TikTok
about the thing. Well, yeah, join. That's a whole other thing.
I've got the face for radio, so I'm not going to TikTok.
Yeah, wow. I mean, first of all, not everybody wants to make videos. Second, and or is comfortable making videos, exactly as you're saying. And oh god, again, making TikTok videos all the time is ridiculous. Plus, it doesn't also. Okay, well, look, I can easily spend the next hour talking about this, and in fact, it is my mission to get people eventually on here whose job is promoting books and talk to them about it. So I'll put it on the shelf for now, but it sounds like you're running into a lot of the same issues that a lot of people do. But at least, you gave it a whirl and you learned something from doing that. Why don't we ride out to the end of this chat here by talking about you had a nice traditional publishing win lately, signing a 2-book deal with Baen Books as part of their push on the whole sword and sorcery front. If I remember correctly, it's essentially them rescuing your Medallion Press books, right? Like Men of Bronze and Memnon. And you're going to be writing a Mythic edition, I believe you called it. Update of Men of Bronze. What can you tell us about how all this happened?
Yeah, so Baen Books has acquired the ebook rights for now and the possible print and audio rights for Men of Bronze and Memnon. So I'm getting the files ready to send to them, and I'm sitting there reading for the first time in years Men of Bronze. I'm like, I could do this so much better, so I opened up a file, and I start rewriting it. And it's like, holy crap. So I had talked a lot to Sean Korsgaard. So I sent the file, I'm like, dude, let me run this by you before I go to your boss. I want to rewrite this. I want to rewrite this as a new book. And he's like, dude, send that to her. So I sent it to Tony, and for the life of me now, I can't remember her last name. You'll have to edit that part out.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah.
So I sent that to her, and she's like, yeah, I mean, it's not part of this particular deal. It will have to go through their editorial process. But yeah, they're all for that. They're like, and it takes Men of Bronze back to its fantasy tradition, because it started as a Conan novel.
Right. So is that part, aside from taking advantage of these many more years of you getting better at what you do? Is it about making it more of a sword and sorcery novel?
Yes, it will become a sword and sorcery novel set in Egypt, and I've gotten the first couple of chapters rewritten. There was a lot of, when I first wrote it, in several places I wrote myself into a corner because I was pantsing the whole thing. This was before I learned how to do the plotting.
Right, so no outline, okay.
Well, there was a 4 note cards with each section that I wanted to write. And as I would write, I would fill up a notebook with clippings from magazines, from photocopies from books from the library, notes that I would find in different things. So I had a notebook sitting next to me with my research in it. And I'd sketch out places where I wanted action to take place. But I had no idea where the story was going. So chapter 1, I write the largest plot hole. You could have driven a truck through this. Where the enemy, the villain, decides to explain his entire plan in a letter that comes from Persia, and they happen to intercept it. I'm like, they didn't use letters like that. They didn't have, hi, I'm the bad guy, and this is what I plan to do. So I wanted to take care of that and several other mammoth plot holes. And Bane's like, yeah, that's fine. And then, when I start to write original Sword and Sorcery, they're like, we get first dibs. Though actually my previous publisher gets first dibs, or my current publisher gets first dibs. St. Martin's.
Right?
The next thing I write, they have the right of first refusal. Hopefully, I don't know. When I'm finished with Grimner, I start in finishing a novel about Shavatus the Thief from Black Colossus for Titan. If they don't take it, if for whatever reason they read it and they don't like it, then all of that IP gets stripped out. It becomes a fantasy novel of Sword and Sorcery, and then somebody else gets it. And then after that, I actually got a couple of ideas for books that I think Bane would like them. It will depend. But I just came off of a 4-book contract. I am not doing another 4-book contract. Get 1 or 2 books at a time, and we'll see how it goes.
Oh, that's interesting. Because, I guess, it comes down to the whole thing where it's not hard to see how it would be onerous to be, tied to 4 or 5 books, whatever, at the same publisher. At the same time, I know a lot of authors would say, oh, nice problem.
It is a nice problem. It's stability in the fact that you don't have to go hustle for the next publisher, but there's no stability in the fact that they paid you 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And you pretty much don't get anything else unless you hit certain benchmarks, which I have not hit. So, I'm not a household name. I'm not I sell okay, but I don't sell great.
Well, and certainly it sounds like life got in the way.
And
for a little while
bless them, they could have just dumped me and gone on about their business, and there would have been nothing I could have done. But they stuck by me, so God bless them. So
I think this is very exciting right now.
It is. It is
with Metabron's and Memnon and whatever.
I still would like somebody to back up a money truck to me and just dump me, bury me in money.
just keep handing over sacks with dollar signs until somebody feels embarrassed about the whole thing.
And I don't embarrass easy.
Well, we'll have to figure that out. But nonetheless, it's I'm not saying all the problems are solved and everybody rides off into the sunset, but I think this is a lovely note to be playing right now, and certainly a lovely note to end this interview on.
Here we go.
If people want to learn more about you and keep up to date on all things Scott Oden, where should they find you online? scottoden.wordpress.com. That is the central hub of Scott. And you've got links to all your social media on there, right?
I'm not as active on Twitter anymore. Then I got Facebook. I have an author Facebook page. But you can always hit up Whetstone Discord, and I'm always lurking around there somewhere.
All right, take a shot. We push the Whetstone Discord.
Whetstone Discord.
Oh, I love it. I just feel like increasingly like, God, I gotta get more guests on here that I didn't find through the Whetstone Discord. Oh, well, what can I say?
It's the place to be. It's a hip and happening joint.
Yeah. All right, Scott. Thank you ever so much. I can't wait, to see what the Mythic Edition of Menabronze is like. I'm dying to read that.
Well,
and everything else you've got coming down the pipe. Thanks for spending time with me.
Well, thank you for having me on. This is one of the better podcasts. There you go.
All right, man. Good night. So I'm Writing a Novel features original intro and outro music by Gloria Guns and is hosted by yours truly, Oliver Brackenbury. If you'd like to submit a question, then please email it to soimwritinganovel@gmail.com. You can also holler at the show on Twitter. Look for @so_writing. For now, Mr. Musk, please consider sharing the show with anybody who might like it, or checking out any of the other ways you can support the show by heading to soimwritinganovel.com/support the show, which has things like links to our Patreon, Coffee, and PayPal. Thanks for hanging out with me, and Scott, and I'll see you soon.